It's been said that to understand the fruits of something, it's important that we understand the roots of that something. When we take a look at school avoidance, there are 8 root causes of school avoidance which help us to unlock what may be triggering the actions of school avoidance. Now, this is in no way an exhaustive list, but these are some of the 8 things that we want you to be on the lookout for. So the first is anxiety disorders. Children with anxiety disorders, such as generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, or separation anxiety disorder, may experience intense fear or worry about attending school. Anxiety-related symptoms can be triggered by various factors, including academic pressures, social interactions, or specific school-related situations. Another factor is traumatic events. Traumatic experiences such as bullying, abuse, or family crisis can lead to school avoidance. Children may associate school with negative memories or experiences, leading them to avoid school as a way to cope with distressing, emotional situations. Remember, trauma is a subjective experience. Each youngster has the right to say what may be traumatic for them. For example, for some youngsters, an uncle being deported is traumatic, or perhaps their parents going through divorce is traumatic. So it can be any number of traumatic events. Let's not forget learning difficulties. Children who struggle academically or otherwise have learning differences may experience frustration or embarrassment in the classroom, contributing to school avoidance. Fear of failure or ridicule from peers can lead to a reluctance to attend school and engage in academic activities. Sometimes, kids are cruel to each other, so the youngster who developmentally could be 12, but let's say their cognitive development age is 7, may get picked on if they cannot compete in class or feel that they're not up to par with their peers. We must also consider social challenges. Social factors such as peer conflicts, rejection, or difficulty making friends can contribute to school avoidance as well. Children who feel socially isolated or marginalized may develop anxiety about attending school and interacting with their peers. There is also a host of school-related fears to be considered. Students may have specific fears related to school, such as fear of public speaking, or fear of specific situations such as tests, or maybe some type of school project that can cause them to avoid going to school. Perhaps for you, school is a place where you excel, but some of our youngsters may have test anxiety. Some of them may be afraid about their science project that they've got to present in front of the entire class. So it can be school-related fears as well. We must also consider family factors, challenging family dynamics, high levels of parental stress, marital conflicts, or any number of disruptions at home, like divorce, maybe moving to a new city, can contribute to school avoidance. One of the major challenges that probably doesn't get as much attention as it should is parentification. There are 1.3 million parentified kids in this country that provide emotional and instrumental support to their entire families. So these are kids that stay home from school because they're taking care of perhaps a younger sibling, they may be taking care of an elder, maybe a parent that may have some mental health issues, substance misuse issues. They're being literally an adult child, taking care of other adults as well as other youngsters. So it could be a whole host of family factors that could contribute to school avoidance. So a few more to consider would be school transitions. Significant transitions such as starting a new school, moving to a different grade level, or maybe even encountering major challenges in school routine could trigger school avoidance behaviors. If we're nearing the end of the school year, some of us look towards the summer. We've got excitement, we're looking towards what we're going to do over the summer, but for others, it can really be a challenging situation. Or maybe it's the new school year. Maybe it is them going to different types of classes. So there can be an anxiety that some youngsters may experience in the transitioning. Lastly, let's consider school climate and environment. Schools that lack a supportive and inclusive atmosphere may have a history of bullying or violence, or have ineffective disciplinary policies, may increase the likelihood of school avoidance. As you seek to understand this issue, consider these 8 roots we just discussed and use them as a basis for empathy and support for the student who is experiencing them. One of the seminal issues connected to school avoidance is trauma, an emotional wound children experience when they encounter stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with or beyond their control. When school teachers understand the various types of traumas that children experience, trauma triggers, and how trauma shows up in the child's behavior in the classroom, the more empowered you are to support and serve students experiencing school avoidance. Folks, the link between trauma and school avoidance is direct. Trauma can have a profound impact on a child's ability to feel safe and engaged in a school environment. When children experience trauma, it can disrupt their sense of security, making the school setting, with all its social interactions and academic demands, feel overwhelming and unsafe. This can lead to behaviors such as absenteeism, disengagement in class, or avoidance of certain school activities. Understanding the link is crucial in creating supportive environments where all students can thrive. Let's start by understanding what trauma is. Trauma is a subjective experience. Each person has the right to determine what is traumatic for them. What may be traumatic for one student may not be classified as traumatic for another student who experiences the exact same thing. Therefore, we must honor each individual person's experiences and respect their individual trauma impact. With that being said, trauma at its essence is an emotional response to a terrible event that overwhelms the student's typical coping mechanisms. The terrible events can include such instances like witnessing violence, a severe accident that causes bodily injury. It could also include sexual assault, domestic violence, or natural disasters, just to name a few. It can also stem from ongoing situations like physical abuse, neglect, chronic illness, or emotional maltreatment. Trauma can be so devastating that it can affect the student's ability to cope with everyday demands, pressures, or changes that can lead to long-term psychological and emotional issues. Trauma can be categorized into several typologies or types. There is acute trauma. That results from a sudden, single unexpected incident, such as an accident or a violent attack. For example, a child who either witnesses a stabbing or is stabbed themselves would classify as an acute trauma. There's also chronic trauma. That results from repeated exposure and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events, such as domestic violence or ongoing abuse. A child living in a home, for example, with ongoing domestic violence may develop chronic trauma. Next, there is complex trauma. Now, this results from exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive, interpersonal nature. For instance, a child who experiences physical abuse and neglect at the same time could suffer from complex trauma. Lastly, there is something known as secondary trauma. This occurs when someone hears about the firsthand trauma experiences of someone else, either an adult or a peer. In this instance, the student could absorb the pain and stress of others even though they did not experience the traumatic event themselves. In summary, we must remember trauma can manifest in various ways and can have significant effects on a student's well-being and their ability to engage in school. It's important for us as educators to recognize and understand the different types of trauma that students may have experienced. So folks, as we continue with this module, we will delve deeper into the impact of trauma on students and take a look at how trauma may show up in a student's behavior and performance in the classroom. To better understand the impact of trauma on school-age children, let's look at the ACEs research from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood with youngsters 0 to 17 years of age. These could include community violence. A child who witnesses a shooting or gang violence in their neighborhood may develop chronic trauma. They might become anxious, fearful, and hypervigilant, always anticipating danger. This can lead to difficulty concentrating in school, withdrawal from peers, and avoidance of school activities that feel unpredictable or unsafe to them. It can also include homelessness or children living unhoused. This can cause a significant impact on a child's experience of school avoidance. You see, when a child experiences being unhoused, they often face a profound sense of instability and loss due to the constant changing and living arrangements. Transferring between schools frequently can result in missed instructional time, gaps in knowledge, and difficulty in building meaningful relationships with teachers and peers. This can further contribute to feelings of disconnection and avoidance towards school. Let's not forget bullying. Bullying impacts 1 in 5 students on school grounds and 1 in 6 students who are bullied electronically. A child who is bullied at school or online by a classmate might experience acute trauma. The fear and humiliation associated with bullying can make them dread going to school. They might become isolated, develop low self-esteem, and exhibit signs of anxiety or even depression. Another ACE is household dysfunction. Growing up in a household with substance misuse, or a person living with mental illness, parental separation or divorce, incarceration, or domestic violence can negatively impact the student's attachment, self-esteem, and seeing the world as safe and predictable. These feelings can cause them to want to avoid school because they think that they are not safe and cared for. What has been modeled by their caregivers at home can create expectations within the school that other adults will behave in the same way. So folks, I want us to understand there's always stuff behind the stuff. When you first meet a youngster, you may not know about the challenges at home. You may not know about what their ACEs are, but we want you to have an understanding of the ACEs so we recognize it's not you. It's not the school, it's not the curriculum, but it's what has happened to them. And that is where we want to make sure we meet them at, where we see them with compassion, with understanding, so that we can help them. Now, in addition to the ACEs we just talked about, there is also historical trauma. Historical trauma, it refers to collective and cumulative emotional and psychological wounding across generations, particularly resulting from historical events such as colonization, slavery, forced displacement, or genocide, which has a long-lasting effect on the well-being of individuals and the communities that they come from. When children are exposed to historical trauma, either directly or indirectly through their families and communities, it can manifest itself in various adverse experiences that can impact their ability to engage in school today. This impact can be both direct in terms of the child's own experiences and indirect through the intergenerational transmission of trauma within the family and the community. Children who carry the burden of historical trauma may in fact experience profound feelings of grief, loss, and disconnection from their cultural heritage and identity. To be clear, ACEs are linked to a wide range of deep-seated problems, challenges, as well as issues. The more ACEs the student has, the greater negative impact on their developmental domains. Social, the ability to interact and engage with others. Cognitive, mental processes like problem solving, reasoning, even the ability to do math. And emotional, the ability to regulate their emotions and understand and empathize with other people's emotions. The chronic stress and emotional toll of ACEs can lead to difficulties with attention, memory, and organizational skills, which can hinder their academic performance and contribute to feelings of frustration and disengagement from all things school and academic related. Now, let's discuss how trauma can lead to school avoidance. When students experience trauma, they can develop a heightened sense of fear and anxiety. The school environment, with its social interactions and academic challenges and pressures, can feel overwhelming and unsafe to trauma-exposed students. The mental health consequences of ACEs, such as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, can create additional barriers for a student's ability to thrive in the school setting. Here are some of the ways past traumas can manifest in school avoidance. Fear of separation. Traumatized students may fear being away from their primary caregivers, leading to anxiety about attending school. For example, a child who has experienced a sudden loss of a parent might develop separation anxiety from the parent who is still with them. Trust issues. Past trauma can make it hard for children to trust adults, including teachers and school staff. A child who has been betrayed by a caregiver may be wary of forming new attachments. The underlying beliefs, the new people in their lives will hurt them just as the others have. Hypervigilance. Constantly feeling on edge can make it difficult for children to focus in class or participate in activities. A child who has experienced physical abuse, for example, may be constantly on the lookout for danger. Now, let's talk about triggers. Triggers can be defined as anything that brings back a traumatic experience, sensation, or behavior for a person who has experienced trauma. Triggers are very personal and are specific to each individual and can be different types. They could be visual, auditory, could be smells, touch, or internal, meaning that they're triggered by certain thoughts or emotions connected by the student to the traumatic events they've experienced. The sensory nature of triggers can vary across types and vary from person to person. For instance, a student who has been bullied in a crowded hallway may find crowded places anxiety-inducing. Another example could be a person who was physically abused could experience intense fear triggered by simply being touched, a pat on the back, maybe a fist bump, or a high five. All of these are touches that are considered to be good, could be traumatizing for the trauma-exposed child. Other types of triggers can include a specific place, a sound, a smell, or even a type of person that reminds the student of past trauma. We must keep in mind that these responses are not signs of defiance or lack of interest in school, but rather manifestations of the child's coping mechanism to deal with their traumatic experiences. These challenges can make it extremely difficult for the student to feel safe and supported in their learning environment, leading to a desire to avoid school as a means of coping with their emotional struggles. Folks, at this time, how about we pause from our discussion and take a question from our mailbag? That's a very good question. Thank you for that. We must understand that there is no significant learning without a significant relationship. Learning is all about trust and vulnerability. To learn, you must trust the person teaching you to respect you, care for you, and have positive regard for you as they instruct you. To learn is also to be vulnerable because the learning process can involve mistakes, uncertainty, and change. When trauma disrupts attachments, relationships of all kinds can be tough, including those with teachers, because the student doesn't feel safe, secure, and able to predict what may happen next. the best teachers can do is to communicate empathy and understanding to build the relationship with the student so attachment can eventually take place. The beauty about the human spirit is that stressed attachments can be repaired, and students can learn to trust again with the teacher, showing consistency, caring, and compassion. Thank you for that amazing question. If you'd like to submit a question to be featured in our next video, please send your question to mailbag@presidentialconsultants.com.